First, what is poverty? Poverty and wealth are usually relative phenomena. They are not absolute. We normally talk about poor or rich in relation to each other. There is no standard measure of poverty or wealth. It is always changing, and it depends on whether we compare amongst each other. Ending poverty is an impossible mission, because in this room there will always be the poorest and there will be the richest, even if only by a cent. Just as there is the tallest in this room and the shortest, just as there is the fattest in this room and the thinnest. It is inevitable. In that regard, it is part of human inequality and there is nothing wrong with it. Wealth or poverty, when we measure it, is something relative. When, for example, they find a tribe in the Amazon, or a primitive tribe somewhere, we never say that it is poor even though it lacks material means, simply because it is not compared to other groups, and therefore we cannot say whether it is rich or poor. That tribe or that group is poor as soon as we incorporate it into a larger society and we compare it to other groups. Before that, we could not say that it is poor. We could say that there are some elements of absolute poverty or wealth, but always in relative terms. We talk about poverty when we incorporate the tribe into a larger group, and we begin to see that some are starving to death, others are not starving to death. Some have many goods, others have few goods. But by definition, poverty and wealth will never end. There will always be a poorer group. Even in Liechtenstein, which is the richest country on earth, there will be the poorest in Liechtenstein and the richest. It is impossible to avoid that, and there would probably be differences of 3, 4, or 5 times between one and another. But it does not mean that the richest in Liechtenstein is very rich, nor that the poorest in Liechtenstein is very poor, just as the poorest in this room isn't necessarily poor, just as the richest in this room isn't necessarily rich. So, we will never be able to avoid the fact that there are poorer people, because there will always be some people who attain certain goods sooner than others. So, we say, now in Spain we have the Ebola vaccine, and in other countries they don't. We are rich. We are rich because someone has to be the first, for whatever reason, to enjoy the goods, because of physical necessity. The production capacity of a good is limited. For example, the vaccine. 5 or 6 are produced in the world. There will always be 5 or 6 lucky ones who enjoy that good and others who can only receive it later. Over time, that vaccine will become widespread and we won't be able to say that there are rich and poor. But then there will be a new solution to a new problem. That happens with all goods. Due to the pure necessity of production, they cannot be distributed to everyone at the same time, and that will always establish inequalities. Rich societies are societies in which there are many rich individuals, and poor societies are societies in which there are many poor individuals. But within rich societies, there are poorer people, and in poorer societies, there are people who live in a rich way. So, what I want to explain here with these previous comments is the idea of how to get out of poverty, which is something that we all commonly understand. The idea that everyone can access certain basic goods, certain consumer goods, food, security, healthcare, housing, clothing, and so on. How do we make a society, a group of people, most of the world's population or the world's entire population, have access to these goods? I hate poverty. I hate the poor. I don't want there to be any left. It's something I don't like. I don't want there to be any left. And I love wealth. I love the rich. I want everyone to be rich, to a greater or lesser extent. I want poverty to be abolished on earth. And because I want the poor to stop being poor, I defend these ideas. Not to defend the rich, but so that the poor can stop being poor. And all I intend to point out today are some ideas to get out of this situation of poverty. Poverty or wealth are a matter of culture. They are a matter of values, of attitudes. And what must always be explained is wealth, not poverty. Poverty is the normal circumstance of humanity. Throughout history, poverty in the absolute sense of lack of material goods that today are considered basic is something that is common to the entire history of humanity. Only some people, and very recently, managed to eliminate it in a generalized or quite extensive way in their societies. And how is this achieved? Well, with a complex combination. Poverty, obviously, is not the fault of the poor. It is the fault of certain ideas that the poor assume, just as wealth is not largely the merit of the rich. It is thanks to certain ideas, values, concepts, and attitudes that the rich have. We don't have the merit of living in a rich country. Also, we cannot blame the person who lives in a poor country. It is not directly their fault. It is the fault of the ideas, values, attitudes that poor countries have. Poverty, basically, is a matter of culture, and wealth is a matter of culture. A culture of poverty and a culture of wealth differ essentially in one thing: time. The perspective of time in how we deal with future events. To the extent we are able to live while thinking about the future, being able to sacrifice immediate needs so that we can satisfy future needs. To the extent we can deprive ourselves of present pleasures to have future pleasures, it's a matter of time. The culture of the poor country and the culture of the rich country differ in how they handle time. If we are a carpe diem culture of living in the moment, a concept that I personally hate, the idea of living in the moment, living life, enjoying, drinking, or going out. Let's party, let's have a good time, let's eat and drink, tomorrow we'll die. As the ancients said, carpe diem, as modern youth today use the saying. Well, no. No. Societies that emerge from poverty are those that know how to sacrifice. They are tough. They know how to sacrifice present consumption. They know how to live with little today to have more tomorrow. It is a matter of time. Some sociologists have studied that. Banfield, for example, in a famous work. Oscar Lewis, an anthropologist, in another famous work explaining why some people are rich and others are poor. The topic of poverty and wealth is a very researched topic by all the so-called development economists from all sides. Jeffrey Sachs, for example, Paul Collier, Sudha Shenoy, for example, or the great Peter Tamas Bauer, and so on. All of them try to explain and reach conclusions of this kind. It is a matter of time. It's about how people from a culture of poverty see time and how they try to satisfy short-term needs. They do not defer pleasure. However, people with a culture of wealth think in the long term. They save. They try to defer their pleasure over time, which leads to some positive attitudes that later lead to wealth. But it is a perspective of time. A rich person is going to think in the medium and long term, not only in the short term. On the other hand, the person with a culture of poverty is going to try to satisfy his needs in the short term. It's the example psychologists and anthropologists always explain. The kid that takes one candy today and the kid who chooses to have 2 candies in a week. The one who is able to make a sacrifice in order to receive 2 candies in a week is the one who is systematically less poor. The one who does not want to make a sacrifice, who wants short-term consumption, who wants to enjoy life, very probably has a culture of poverty. So it is an idea that, for me, is central. It is an idea of educating about the concept of time, in the values of time, and above all, if they attack the values of time, as it is culturally done, it can lead to a poor society. The culture of time is being systematically attacked in our societies, sometimes even with your collaboration. Let's have a good time, party, nothing matters. Why are we going to save? Why are we going to sacrifice? We're young. No. No. Now is when your savings are worth more thanks to compound interest, as they will explain in other speeches. It is now when you have to give up enjoyment in order to live well when you are older, to be able to have a full life. It is good that you save, that you accumulate in order to live a healthy life. So, what 3 values, apart from time, are central to me that derive from time. To get a society out of poverty or make a prosperous society, as long as you want to get out of poverty. Wealth is also something that should be voluntary, but you can only be voluntarily poor in rich societies, because the rest of the needs are covered and there is a safety net. It's easier to live a life of poverty, of retirement, of abandonment, in a monastery, in a commune, or so on, if you live in an advanced, rich, or prosperous society. What three elements am I going to highlight here? Savings, capitalism, and hard work. These are the three basic elements of getting out of a culture of poverty. Savings, yes, savings. Always live below your means. Always below, never above. That's what makes a society rich. Like our ancestors, like the Galicians of before, who always lived below their means, and like most of your grandparents, not you. You are already of the modern culture, carpe diem and things like that. But your grandparents always lived below their means. They saved, they did not spend. They bought everything, if possible, with savings, never using credit. In any case, credit was only for a very expensive good, a capital good, or a real estate good, but never for a vacation. Imagine your grandparents asking for a loan or selling a house to go on vacation to Punta Cana. That can be done, it is legitimate, but you should save beforehand, not with credit. You can't immediately transform a consumer good into a capital good. So, savings. Always live below your means. Chinese and Scots, for example, are people who live with half of what they earn. And that is how it should be. And why is saving good? Because savings free up resources. Savings capitalizes society. Savings allows the financing of investment goods, factories, roads, power plants, transportation, ports, goods and services that help capitalize and make a society richer. Remember that mythical example from Bernbowick of Robinson's coconuts or blackberries. In order to have a stick, he has to previously save the necessary coconuts or blackberries, spending a whole day working without eating to produce a capital good. When you were born, most of you are very young, you already had everything done. You were born in a hospital. Then maybe your mother was transported in an ambulance. There were roads, you had electricity, you had cars, all kinds of means of communication. Who built that? Did that suddenly appear? Or was it the result of hard, really hard saving of your grandparents and great-grandparents, who lived in much poorer circumstances than yours, and they saved much more than you, but they sacrificed. They were always prospering, and they sacrificed. They were tough people, in the sense that they sacrificed to give a better future to you, to your parents, and to you. And what are you doing now? Burning and eating up capital. And this is not a lecture, it's some kind of harangue. Savings are vital. To live below your means is vital, in order to accumulate capital. Also, it requires a little bit of individualism as well as saving. Saving must also be for oneself. One of the problems of many poor societies is that everything is considered common. When a person prospers or saves, neighbours, nephews, cousins, brothers-in-law come to ask him to share that with him. You have so much, give me a part of what you have. Give me something, marry my daughter, and things like that. And that completely discourages saving. All kinds of tax measures and interventionist measures also completely discourage saving. They attack savings, which is a vital component. For example, Keynesianism, regardless of whether you believe in it or not, is a policy that does tremendous damage to savings. And, in general, the current economic policy does enormous damage to savings. Public debt, for example, because it drains savings and moves it to current consumption. Public spending withdraws capital spending, money that individuals could have saved, and spends it on current consumer goods. They are burning capital and they are completely discouraging present and future saving. That's the first factor. Because private property, which is considered an important factor, is very important, but it is not the central factor. Private property is from the times of the Romans. Many Indian tribes had private property, but those Indian tribes, despite having private property, did not prosper. They had private property, but they were not able to get out of stagnation, and savings alone is not enough either. Saving is also a central aspect. It is a pillar of foresight, of thinking in the long term. And here we enter the second element, which is that those savings must be invested in a capitalist way. Capitalism was probably the greatest invention of human beings in an economic aspect. The idea of double accounting, the idea of profit and loss, the idea of creating a sound monetary system. Not what there is now, fractional reserve banking, electronic money that is created with injection from central banks. That is not sound money. Metallic money, gold and silver, that is what is healthy. Why? Because that allows people to think about the long term. Money that is not going to lose its value in the long term. We need capitalism because capitalism is not only about savings, but also investing correctly, through elements of investment, through a rational calculation of investment returns. We need prices in order to invest that money, and above all, we need profits and losses to invest that money. Profit and loss is a central element. It tells us, invest here, invest there, disinvest, take the money out of there, put it there. That's what we need if we want to save. Robinson could have saved a lot of coconuts, but he could have spent them the wrong way. For example, by making a metal axe instead of a stick. He would miscalculate because he wouldn't have enough. Or maybe Robinson could have saved just so he could spend a day having a snack on the beach without doing anything. Saving is a necessary but not sufficient condition. Those savings must be invested and used correctly. So, we need profits, losses, prices, a non-interventionist economic system. The state shouldn't decide the allocation of money through incentives, subsidies, restrictions, regulations, and so on, that seek to favour their power objectives but do not favour a correct allocation of economic resources. So, capitalism is the second central element. We need stock markets, we need financial markets, despite what they say, healthy financial markets and healthy stock markets. We need those elements. Without them, savings and a perspective of time would be of no use. We need those wonderful institutions that are the markets. And I say wonderful because even today we do not understand very well how they work, but I only know that how they function is spectacular, and it led the world to enormous doses of prosperity. And those countries that followed these recipes prospered, and a good part of their populations abandoned poverty. First, savings. Second, capitalism. Capitalism without savings is of no use. And third, here is my conservative side, hard work. Before giving this lecture, I was reading Skidelsky, Keynes's biographer, the book he recently released called How Much Is Enough? And I'm reading all these modern things about degrowth. Sergei Latouche, Tim Jackson, and these people, to see what they say. And there is a culture that is very much transferred to public opinion that work is bad, that you must degrow, that you must live a lazy life, of leisure, without doing anything, and prioritizing leisure over all things. Well, no. No. No, and 1,000 times no. No. Work is good. Work is what leads us to frugal lifestyle habits. Someone who works hard cannot have certain vices, nor does he have a lot of time to spend. It is good that there is work, and hard work. Work also teaches us to produce more. A good part of technological advances, a good part of technical advances, a good part of your training and professional qualification occurs in the world of work. The relationships, the skills, the know-how, those kind of things occur in the field of work. It is necessary to work, and work hard, like many people on earth do, or as like our grandparents did, because what we must ask ourselves is, what way have we followed to get here? What did our grandparents do? Did they work a lot or not? Did they complain about 35-hour per week jobs? They asked for fewer working hours? Or did they work hard, night and day, many times on a Sunday, many times 10 to 12 hours per day? What did they do to get out of poverty? Those are the values I'm very interested in. The idea of seriousness in trading, which is also led by the world of work. The idea of being honest people, of being serious people, of living organized lives. Work also leads to organized lives that allow us to think in the long term, to capitalize society and save money. Work also leads us to become people who sacrifice. Work leads people to have to suffer to put food on the table. They must work, and that also leads to the fact that when bad times come, like a crisis, working societies endure crises well. If they must work for less, they work for less. If they must earn less, they earn less. They don't go on strike to demand rights and things like that. When bad times come, they are resistant, they adapt to their needs, they do not complain, and they prosper. That's why I criticize all these modern ideas of living without working, basic income, and these things that exist today, because they are ideas that directly attack the core of wealth. They are ideas that not only talk about redistributing what we already have, they take what already exists for granted, as if what already exists didn't need constant depreciation. We have power plants, cars, etc. They have to be depreciated. They have to be serviced every certain number of years. If there is no capital and savings, how do we maintain the current standard of living? If we spend money on basic incomes and we live without working for 2 or 3 years, what happens to the accumulation of capital? What happens to the wealth that we have? That's why I say work influences ethics, values, policies, and the ideologies that we have. That's why I never get tired of fighting the ideas about having the right not to work. That we want to be surfers, as Van Parijs would say, and spend our lives fulfilling ourselves. Let's fulfill ourselves, live our lives. The state will give us a basic income and pay our expenses. We rent an apartment between 4 friends, and we're going to dedicate ourselves to painting and making art. And the rest of us who work will pay for that, right? Who would work in that basic income society to support the others? That's the problem. Those kinds of ideas do a lot of harm to the ethics of work. With this, I'll finish my discourse. I just want to say that the elements of wealth and poverty, if we want to have services, public or private, any kind of service, we must be rich. We must be productive. Good healthcare, good roads, good education, public or private. In the hypothetical case that publicly funded healthcare, roads, or education can be good, this will only happen in a society that has the economic means to maintain that. If we attack the means, if we attack the values that made us rich, we will return to being poor again without mercy. Thank you very much. The time perspective you mentioned is very interesting. The short term versus medium to long term. But I think someone could question you directly by saying, well, a poor person can't do anything in the medium to long term because he is trying to survive. He cannot save money because he just about has enough to survive. We all come from caves. We all come from having nothing. Rich, poor, black, white, yellow, whatever. We all come from caves. Some of our ancestors, despite having nothing, they saved. When you say you don't have anything, okay, let's see. How do you live? Do you have a car? Okay, you have your car. You already have some expenses. A car is sometimes necessary, but you can also use public transport. How do you live? Do you want a flat for yourself alone? Our immigrant ancestors lived with 8 people in a room. It's the same option today. You can always live with less. and we don't have to take for granted what we have today. It is a matter of time perspective. Because even among the poor, there are people who get out of poverty, and vice versa. Among the rich, there are some who fall precisely over that matter of time perspective. But I criticize the ethics of consumerism a lot, which is a very modern ethic. Now we see life is all about parties, drinks, and that's the ideal they want to associate with capitalism. Capitalism is the opposite. Capitalists are thrifty, they do not spend, they live below their means, they drive old cars. The rich people I know live like that. They do not show off. Certainly, they don't spend a fortune on drinks. Politicians do. A truly rich person doesn't spend hard-earned money on those kind of things. The opposite. They try to get the most out of what they have. But again, we all come from caves, and the idea of time is central. The lower classes, with a high time preference, as Banfield says, tend to gratify the short term. For example, what Oscar Lewis and Banfield study is that the lower sectors, the poorest sectors, deny practically nothing to their children. For example, they want to go out at night, they all go out at night. You want to have sexual relations at 12 years old, you can have them. Do you want to drink? Drink. There is no inhibition. The perspective of time is essential. The classes with low time preference are the ones that later lead to prosperity. They are disciplined with their time. They say, now is not the time to drink. It is the time to study. It's the time to learn skills for a job. You will have sexual relationships when you are older. You don't go out at night if you are this young. Why? Because I say so. There is no need to explain anything else, assuming the father is saying this. Those kinds of values are the ones that lead to success. Not being disciplined with time is what leads to failure. Some of our ancestors had to do this. All of them lived off the mammoth or whatever. Some would eat the whole mammoth, and others would save the mammoth or salt it, thinking about the future. And in the future, they were able to undertake projects such as agriculture and other kinds of goods. Out of pure necessity, we all descend from the same ancestors, and we all start out as poor. That is what must be explained. Why some came out of poverty and others did not. Some were able to say, I have this piece of meat here, I am not going to eat it now, I'm going to save it for the future. And that other day, I'm going to be able to produce more, I'm going to be able to produce in the winter, I'm going to be productive in the other months of the year, or in the other years. But it had to come from someone's instinct. But the three things must be combined, otherwise it won't work. That's why wealth is so complicated, and that's why wealth is so historically scarce. It is not intuitive. The normal thing is to eat what there is now. It is true that determining whether a child can resist the temptation to eat a piece of candy is a good predictor. The longer he can wait, the higher the salary he will probably have in the future. It is not a good predictor that he is going to be a good entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur is the one who really generates wealth. In relation to that, they say you can teach kids how to save. What would you think of a society in which savings were imposed? No, no, it cannot be imposed, it is cultural. And furthermore, I am against imposing things. I am against the systematic attack of healthy and conservative values and the value of savings. I am radically against it because the attack is systematic. From the public power, from the school, and from the general university education, they attack the concept of time. Wrong ideas are taught, in my opinion. But what you say is very intelligent. One thing is savings, and another is entrepreneurship. That's why I talk about combining the two things. The entrepreneur perhaps does not have the ability to save, and the one who saves is not necessarily an entrepreneur. Maybe he doesn't have great ideas about creating companies and things like that. That's why it's good that the two things are combined. One finances the other. You've been talking about work, and now, right at the end, you briefly mentioned strikes. If there is an unfair situation at work, is there a right to go on strike? Should the state allow strikes? There is a right to strike, obviously, but the business owner also has the right to hire strike breakers. You have the right to stop working. There are unfair situations sometimes. They are not usually derived from the employment contract. You have the right to strike, and you have the right to demand the salary that you deem to be appropriate. It is like if you have a girlfriend and you say, I don't want to hang out with you until you stop going out at night. Okay, so you go on strike, but your girlfriend has the right to look for another boyfriend while you go on strike. It's the same thing. You can go on strike, but the employer can hire others while you are on strike. That way of striking seems legitimate to me. And strikes without violence, of course. Would there be a possibility of an arbitrator, in this case the state?
No.
No.
No existe Estado. ¿Qué? No existe Estado.
There is no state. Are there no referees in matches?
Puede haber árbitros privados.
There may be private arbitrators, and in fact, they are used a lot in strikes. But no, the state is not the best arbitrator. The state is going to take sides with one of the parties, the one that has the most strength, or the one the state is more interested in.
¿Tendría algún sentido un ahorro que nunca llega a consumirse?
Would it make sense to have savings that are never spent? Also, is there an ideal proportion between savings and consumption in a society?
No, no hay una solución ideal. Depende de cada persona.
No, there is no ideal proportion. It depends on each person. Savings always end up being spent. First, due to vital necessity. There are needs that are imperative. You must clothe yourself, if not you die. You must eat, if not you die. You need today a home, otherwise you die of cold. You must spend. But you can defer many expenditures into the future. What people do not see is that the increase in savings means that you consume more tomorrow, and more or less naturally. The Victorian capitalists of the 19th century in Britain, those who started the Industrial Revolution, lived off the interest of the interest. They had a principle that gave them an interest. That interest gave them another interest, and their increased standard of living derived from capitalization. The larger the principle, the more interest they earned, and the more interest from the interest they earned. That way, they consumed more and more, but in a sustainable way, without ever touching the principle. And the principle was invested in long-term savings, power plants, in factories. That allowed for goods to become cheaper and for them to become richer and richer. But in the end, the principle is spent. Savings are spent on capital goods instead of consumer goods. It is impossible not to consume savings, but if you defer it, you allow society to capitalize. It allows you to feed another person or produce goods for another person, so that this person can produce machines, factories, that will make you richer.
A ver, la verdad es que me ha ofendido un poco cómo has definido la pobreza y la riqueza, porque...
The truth is that I have been a little offended by how you have defined poverty and wealth. You have talked about poverty as if the rich were those who knew how to save, those who knew how to manage their lives, and the poor, those who didn't know how to save or didn't know how to do it well.
Dije que no es culpa de ellos. Es culpa de las ideas que tienen.
I've said that it's not their fault. It's the fault of the ideas they have. It's very different.
La pobreza es que existe por un montón de causas.
Poverty exists for a lot of reasons. A disability, there can be 1,000 causes. I have been very poor, and I've always had the same mentality. And now I can be rich. And then you say that in the past our grandparents had the culture of saving. I believe that our grandparents have a very similar culture to the one the poorest countries have nowadays, which is to share, to work like crazy, and save everything they can and share. And that is the same mentality that we had here before. Now, in fact, in the richest countries, I believe the mentality is to earn a salary and spend it.
Sí, ese es el problema.
Yes, that's the problem.
Hablé de dos cosas.
I talked about two things. First, I've said that there are several social values. Capitalism is a technique. It requires, again, institutions. It requires, for example, knowing how to count, how to calculate interest, stock exchanges, markets. Those kinds of things are human interventions. Not all of humanity had them. Our ancestors had that mentality to save and so on, but I said that saving is not enough, at least in the beginning. Nowadays, a poor country can capitalize without saving, by borrowing from those who did save previously. It is the advantage of arriving second. Economists talk about this. Since others already have capital, they can lend it to you. The acquisitive mentality is not enough. It must be combined with capitalism, with a rational use of those savings. If not, it doesn't work either. It can be invested in real estate, in land or financial assets, but it does not transform into more production. That's what I've tried to say. It is a combination of both things. So, if you have those ideas, it shows you have a capitalist mentality. What I'm trying to explain is that humanity has always been poor. What needs to be explained is wealth. The strange thing historically is wealth. All of humanity maintained a poor and constant standard of living until the 19th, 18th century. Basically, the entire population of the world had the same income. Spain had even less income than the Chinese, for example, in the 18th and 19th centuries. What needs to be explained is why some countries became rich sooner, and then that wealth spreads like an oil stain to the rest of the world. Because even poor countries nowadays benefit from the wealth of the rich. The situation of poor countries is the same as it has always been. What needs to be explained is why some got out of poverty. In the past, all of humanity was poor. Today, poverty is being reduced, thank God, every day, slowly. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes down, but it is being reduced thanks to the diffusion of these values and ideas. And thank you very much for your question.
Buenos días. Quería preguntarle al profesor Bastos qué le parece.
I wanted to ask Professor Bastos, what do you think of the idea that there should be formal institutions to defend property rights?
Las instituciones son cosas que defienden ahora Acemoglu.
Institutions are now defended by Acemoglu and Robinson, the institutionalists. Institutions have no physical reality. The idea of the institution of private property is in the mind. The idea that you have to respect the deals, the contracts, and the institutions that sanction those who fail to comply, and so on. They are part of the values I mentioned, but they are not real outside our heads. But, of course, it is good that they exist. It is part of the values. I cannot explain all of this in 30 to 35 minutes. The development economists have been explaining this in thousands of books. I mentioned a few points to give a small lecture and to introduce the debate to these liberal people from Spain, but not beyond this. Many topics are left to discuss. We could talk about many topics. Thank you very much for your kind attention.